My name is McKenzie Fox Potter, and I work for the Kentucky Horticulture Council. My job is a special projects coordinator, which really doesn't tell you much about what I do. My passion and what I have done for the past two and a half years that I've been with the Hort Council has been farm to school. And today I wanted to talk to you guys about kind of the things that you need to know in order to sell to schools. And the National Farm to School Network developed some of the curriculum that I'm going to go through. I was thinking about today, I don't even know how many presentations about farm to school at this point. So I kind of just compiled a bunch of the ones that I've done, and also keeping in mind the bringing the farm to school curriculum, because I think the National Farm to School Network does a really good job of preparing producers to sell to schools. So first, if you're unfamiliar with the Hort Council, we work on the statewide level. We're very similar to K-Card in that sense. We're a nonprofit that works across the state, and we all kind of work from home. So we have staff members in many different places, like K-Card does as well. And our website's right there, and our Facebook page. I'd encourage you all to follow that. We have some really great content that our direct marketing coordinator puts out, and then just lots of information about our different programs. So we have a small fruits program also, which can give you money to grow small fruits, up to $1,250, I believe is the amount. Of course, farm to school, that's what I work on. Cut flowers, which is more of Dakota's thing, but Bethany and Dakota work on that together. And at the Fruit and Vegetable Conference this year, we're excited to have a specific cut flower grower course. We have special funding for GAP certification. We have an ag water testing program, which is kind of in the process of changing direction, just because of the USDA requirements for ag water testing, but we'll still be continuing to do work in that. We have so many resources about crop insurance that we worked on with K-Card, and then we do some value chain coordination. And then we are a founding member of the Kentucky Farm to School Network. So the Farm to School Network was established last year, and it was established to promote farm to school within the state and kind of bring together all of the people that were working on farm to school. And so we are a founding member along with Community Farm Alliance, Feeding Kentucky, and the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. And we're a coalition of agencies, organizations, and individuals that are passionate about farm to school in the state, and we work on initiatives together. One of those initiatives being this Bringing the Farm to School Producer Training Program, which was created by the National Farm to School Network. But we took the training in order to teach that course, and also adapted it to kind of some more Kentucky specific information. And we also have a Facebook page, which is where you're going to find the most information about us. We're in the process of developing a website, but it's not out there to the public yet. So getting into the Bringing the Farm to School Producer Training Program, I'm not going to go over all this. I just wanted to make sure that I gave proper credit to the National Farm to School Network, as they're the ones that developed this program with the intention of helping agricultural producers build their capacity to sell to schools. And so, just so I can get a sense of who you all are and where you're from, if you could put in the chat your location and what you grow, raise, or sell. And then also if you're interested in selling to schools. Some of you I know already have sold to schools, so. And these are just some pictures here of some of our farm to school network activities in the past few months. But while you all are putting that in the chat, I'll go ahead and move on to talking about what is farm to school. So I think conventionally, when we hear farm to school, we kind of just think about selling local products to schools and schools serving it in the cafeteria. But there are three kind of key pieces of farm to school, and maybe two that you haven't heard as much about. And those two pieces are school gardens and the education piece of things. And those pieces are also extremely critical to building long-term supporters of agriculture. because it's not just, we don't just want to serve the kids the local food and not convey to them the importance of eating local. We want them to be involved, hands-on, with growing their own food, with seeing how food grows, so that they will grow into lifelong supporters of agriculture. We want those kids to grow into the adults that go to the farmer's market and purchase locally grown food. And so while we may think of farm to school as just being kind of that procurement piece, which means purchasing a food, those other pieces are pretty critical to the success of farm to school. And there's a lot of reasons why local food makes sense in school meals. Probably the biggest one and the most important one to this group is that is keeping money in our local economy and supporting local farmers. In a little bit, I'll kind of give you guys an idea of how much money is coming into the state for school meals, and hopefully you'll understand the magnitude of why school markets have such great potential. And we should all be pushing for our farmers to sell into school markets because it's a lot of money. It also increases school meal quality and overall program participation. So one of the things we're going to learn today that I'll talk about is that for most schools in Kentucky, they are getting reimbursed by the federal government based on how many kids are eating their meals. And farm to school and serving locally grown food has actually been shown to increase that participation, which means more money is coming into those programs. It has also been shown to increase kids' willingness to try new fruits and vegetables, which we know is also very important because there's record high obesity rates in Kentucky, but all across the US. And it supports, broader school board priorities and school wellness policies. So how does it benefit you? Well, not only is that getting money into your pocket and creating a more sustainable economic or financial source for your farm, but you might also care about public health. Well, really, we all should care about public health because our taxpayer dollars end up paying for a lot of things within public health. So if we have more healthy people, less money is being spent on healthcare and such. The education piece might be really important to you. So if you're really passionate about getting kids to support their local farmer, maybe that's one of the reasons why you choose to participate in farm to school. It's good for the environment. Food is not traveling as far. And then for a lot of farmers, the community engagement piece is really great as well. Because when those kids recognize you at the farmer's market when they're walking by with their parents, they might say, oh, I want to go buy such and such from that farmer because they've seen you at their school, they've tasted your carrots or whatever. And so there's a lot of reasons why you might choose to participate in farm to school. There's also probably reasons why you might choose not to participate in farm to school. And I'm not here to tell you that farm to school is 100% right for you. I just want you to know that there's a huge opportunity. And if it makes sense for your farm, then we should certainly explore that. And ironically enough, David is on this call today, and we featured him in our little producer spotlight. And David says that I sell farm to school because of the ability to deal with one customer, though it may be a difficult customer, and to go from selling one case to hundreds of cases or 450 cases. And so I think it's important to think about how farm to school fits in with your whole farm. Because like I said, it might make sense for you and it might not. And so I think that I'm not going to get super in depth with this tonight, but this is just something that you should think about really when you're considering all avenues of marketing for your products, not just selling to schools, but thinking about, what is important to you.
No, I haven't looked yet. What up? What's up?
I sent you a tracking number.
Oh, cool.
Okay. He's muted now, so we got that taken care of. All right, so it's also important to think about all the different pieces of your farm and why farm to school might fit in or not. So your production capabilities, your ability to market, and if you can make a profit selling to schools, because that's, you can't have a farm if you're not making money. Thinking about your lifestyle and your farm goals, and what aspects of community are important to you. And so we're going to kind of take somewhat of a deep dive into child nutrition programs and selling to schools. And I don't want it to feel super overwhelming. It's a lot of information, but I think it's important information. And I tried to fit as much good information into this hour that we have together as possible. So hopefully you walk out feeling hopeful and not just way too overwhelmed by all of the information I give you tonight. But of this information, I think it's really important to kind of get an idea of how big the school market is. And so in Kentucky, child nutrition programs serve nearly 700,000 kids. And this is probably the most important information of this slide, which is the amount of funding that is provided to programs. So this is 2022 figures. And for breakfast meals, over $123 million was brought into the state from federal funding. For lunch, that number is $328 million. Summer feeding, which occurs obviously during the summer, a little over $10 million. And the number of school districts that are participating in farm to school is about 77. Granted, that statistic's pretty outdated. But the amount of money that was spent on local food in 2015, which is pretty similar right now, it hasn't really grown too much, was just a little under $9 million. Which, when you add up all of that funding that is listed above, comes out to, gosh, what is that? Like $450 million? So $8 million, $9 million is a pretty small fraction of that. And a good chunk of that is actually milk. So when we're thinking about maybe what our local producers are selling to schools, that's actually probably a lot less. So there's a huge opportunity to sell to schools. It just might not be as easy as going to your farmer's market and selling your vegetables on Saturday, because it requires a little bit more planning, a little bit more coordination, but it might be worth it for you. And so to kind of give you some background information, there's a lot of different programs, school meal programs, and I don't want to get too far in depth, but I just want you to be aware of the fact that it's not just school lunch programs. There's also a fresh fruit and vegetable program, which is a great program for schools to buy locally grown fruits and vegetables, because it has to be raw and unprocessed produce. There's the school breakfast program. There's actually an after school snack program, a special milk program, and then there's summer feeding too. So you don't need to memorize all of this information, but it's just good to know before you go into talking with your local food service director, because they're going to speak basically a different language than we speak, right? So having some background knowledge can kind of help bridge the gap. And there's a lot of different ways that schools incorporate local products into their meals. So that could be breakfast, lunch, or dinner. That could be a special program where they serve one local food a month through a harvest of the month. Or I haven't really seen this in Kentucky, but in other states, they'll serve what they call state plates. So it's like a locally sourced meal. Schools incorporate local products into the fresh fruit and vegetable program, like I talked about in the last slide. So that's a snack program for elementary students. There are tasting and educational activities, special events during Farm to School Month. There's a big push for students to crunch into Kentucky grown fruits and vegetables. So there is a multitude of ways that schools can and are currently serving locally grown food. And you can tap into that market and hopefully make some good money from it, really. There are some key players that it can be confusing. So I just want to briefly mention this. At the federal level, the USDA is the one that is really deciding on the nutritional standards and what schools have to comply with. And then a state agency, which in our case is the Kentucky Department of Education, is the one that kind of enforces those rules. So make sure that the schools are complying with the nutritional standards that are outlined by the USDA. And then you get to the very lowest level, which is what you all would be dealing with when you're looking to sell to schools, which is the local school food authority. And so they have to follow all of those rules that are dictated by the USDA. And, they're going to be going through, reviews by the Department of Education. They have some like fairly strict regulations that they have to follow. And I'll talk about those here in a little bit. But those things are ultimately what influences school meal program purchasing. So it's not just the cost of how much food costs. It's also all these other things that the school food service directors have to think about when they're serving meals to kids. So the meal pattern and nutrition requirements, which we are going to talk about here in a minute. And so when you look at school meals, there has to be different components in order to serve a meal. And so for school lunch, that is 5 components. And for a school breakfast, that's only 3 components. And then for the fresh fruit vegetable program, that's just a fruit or vegetable. But those meal components are milk, grain, protein, fruit, and vegetable. And this is a great thing for you all because schools have to serve vegetables and fruits, even if they don't want to. And so, fruit and vegetable growers can get their fruits and vegetables into local schools because it's not optional. It has to be a part of the kids' meals. And, your fruits and vegetables probably taste better than the ones that they're getting from their wholesale distributors. So that can help kids actually eat their fruits and vegetables that they need to eat. And so again, just breaking this down, there's certain requirements for each of those meal components. So, milk has to be fat-free or low-fat. Grains have to be whole grain rich. There's limits on the amount of juice that they can serve. And under vegetables is where it gets a little bit complicated because they have to serve a certain number of colors each week, basically, to the kids. And they're broken down into subgroups, which we're not going to get too far into that. And then, meats for proteins and all that. But the key leverage points for you all, and it really works to your advantage, is that they have to serve different color vegetables and different subgroups. And that can help you sell some of your product. And this, I think, is super interesting and important also for us to review. And I would be remiss if I did not include it because I think sometimes schools get a bad rep for their meals. But when you see this, you can kind of understand why they're at where they're at. So the average cost to produce a school lunch it's less than $4. And for a school breakfast, that is less than $3. And that money for most of our schools in Kentucky is coming entirely from the federal government because our schools have a certain level. I think it's like 75% of our schools all the kids are eating for free. And so that means that all of their funding for their meals is coming from the federal government. And the breakdown of that, it's not just, that doesn't just go into the cost of food. They have to pay their staff. So about 45% goes into food, 45% for labor. And then you have to think about all those other supplies that they need: lunch trays, silverware, cups, all of that kind of stuff. So basically, at the end of the day, they have $1.71 per lunch to spend on food and $1.22 to spend on school breakfast. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you get all of that product together, it actually can be local food can be affordable for a school. The prices, especially right now with all of our supply chain disruptions, local prices are sometimes even cheaper than what they're paying their broadline distributors. But like we said, small numbers add up. If this is a United States number, a whole country number, so 28.9 million meals are served each day. And that adds up to, $50 million a day is being spent on local food or on food in the United States for school meals. And we could get some of that money to be spent locally and promote our own economy. And so here, this is not as pertinent to Kentucky because, as I said, most of our schools are doing entirely free meals. But just to give you an idea of what their reimbursements are, so they're getting about $3.83 per lunch that they serve and $2.35 per breakfast that they're serving. And there's a lot of different models that schools use. And so if you're in like a big area like Louisville, they will have a central kitchen and they'll process all of their food in that kitchen and send it out to all the schools. And that's very different than, say, a small district where the schools are processing all of the food in each individual school. But it's also, it can vary so much between the different schools because some schools do a lot of scratch cooking and others don't have the capacity to do that. And many schools, you know, they are set up for heat and serve, which means that they have very little capacity to prepare foods. So in that case, selling to a school, you might go for more of the route of like, you know, low barrier fruits and vegetables or low barrier foods. So like, you know, they're already serving apples likely. So you give them local apples or lettuce. Like that's something really easy to incorporate into the food that they're already serving. It doesn't require a ton of processing. So it's really dependent on the school. And you really just have to talk to your local food service director to feel out what their capacity is in order to make meals. And that is going to dictate what you would end up selling to the schools. And then I think this is also really important to note because school buyers, so, you know, we think of the person at the cafeteria that's purchasing your food. They have a lot of different names, and depending on your size school district, it might be the person at the very top that you're dealing with, or it might be the person, you know, just at the school that you're dealing with. And so just to make sure that you have heard these words before, school buyers can be called school food authorities. There's school nutrition directors, school food service directors, school food service managers, procurement managers, lots of different names, right? But ultimately it comes down to they're buying the food that they're serving at schools. And those are the people that you want to talk to. And so there are a multitude of ways that you can get local food into your schools. With the two primary supply chains being direct to school, which is what probably most people think of when we talk about farm to school, but there are intermediated supply chains. And according to the USDA Farm to School Census, 63% of school districts that are doing farm to school, well, this was surveyed in 2019, so this was, you know, before COVID, they were using intermediaries such as distributors. So, you know, like Creation Gardens, organizations that are purchasing locally grown food and selling them. But 40% of schools also reported that they were getting local food through a farmer directly. And 32% of school districts, oh gosh, what are these statistics? Seem very similar. I don't know why these numbers are all jumbled. So the point is that a large number of schools are purchasing local food or purchasing food from distributors. So that is one route that you can go. But in that same sense, a lot of schools are also purchasing products directly from the farmers. Okay, and I figured out my statistics here. 63% is actually the nationwide of school districts are purchasing farm to school through intermediaries. And in Kentucky, that number is a lot lower at 32%. And probably a big reason for that is that we don't have a whole lot of distributors that are purchasing locally grown food. And then across the country, 40% are saying that they're getting local food directly from a farmer. In Kentucky, that number is significantly higher because, again, well, in some ways that's great, right? Like we want schools to have that direct connection to farmers, but also with having less distributors that are distributing to schools and purchasing locally grown food, that number is significantly higher in Kentucky. And so again, just to visualize this, you know, you guys are at the top, that producer, you might be selling through an intermediated market channel, such as retail outlets, or food hubs, or a regional distributor like Creation Gardens. You might be selling directly to schools, so school districts. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some collective purchasing cooperatives here in a little bit, which is not something that you hear about a ton, but it has some great potential. And then probably one that we're not really going to see much is through a national wholesale distributor. And that would be like, Gordon Food Service, you're selling to them and they're selling to the schools. And so again, you can sell through food hubs or distributors like Creation Gardens, but there are things to consider with that. This is good for farmers that are already familiar with wholesale practices. Maybe you're already selling to Creation Gardens. And that is also a challenge because you have to be like GAP certified in order to sell to Creation Gardens. The price that you're going to get from Creation Gardens for them to then sell to the school is going to be less probably than if you sold directly to the school, because ultimately, they're the ones that are delivering the produce or the food to the school, so they have to take their cut too. So there's just some extra considerations to think about there. But I think for most farmers, direct to school is what people are thinking of when you talk about farm to school. And that is the relationship directly between a local producer and the school that is purchasing and serving your food. And there's some potential benefits to that over selling to a distributor. The schools, people like to have that direct relationship with their farmer. And it allows you to retain and grow your business and your brand, right? So like I was talking about earlier, if you're at the school and, showing the kids your fruits or vegetables that you grew, and then you're at the farmer's market and that kid sees you, kids remember things and they will probably run up to you and hug you or whatever, or tell their mom that they want to buy some of your delicious tomatoes. And so that's a really great way to kind of create your brand in your community. And then another thing that I think we often don't think enough about is that schools can be a market for your lower grade products, right? So like maybe you're, if you're selling to a distributor and you're selling your grade A products to them, schools, if they're going to process the product anyway, they might not care so much about what grade it is. There is an increased competitiveness in the bidding processes. So with schools, we're going to get more into this in a little bit, but sometimes you will have, or you can establish a contract with schools. And then that, that allows you to kind of have a guaranteed extra market. But for most people and most farmers in Kentucky, we're not really at that level of having contracts. We're doing more of micro purchasing, which is what I'll talk about here in a little bit. And of course, there are drawbacks to selling direct to the schools. So, you're the one that's going out and talking to the schools and convincing them to buy your product. Determining a fair price can be really hard because, the school, they have their budget and you also have your price that you need to get in order to be profitable. And so it's important to know what that price is. There are some extra requirements for selling to schools, but really what it comes down to is you probably already have the basic requirements of selling to schools. So if you're selling to farmers market and have had your produce best practices training, that's really kind of the minimum food safety standards to sell to schools. There's some extra documentation and record keeping because obviously you're going to have to bring an invoice to the school to sell to them. The payment processes are a little bit harder than, or I shouldn't say harder, it's just a longer process than selling directly to the consumer. You're not, it's very unlikely that you will go to the school, drop off your product and be paid at that moment. However, schools are great customers because they will pay you. And so maybe even more so than some of your other buyers, they're reliable. And so this is what I was referencing earlier about collective purchasing models. So all across our state and actually all across the country, there are what are called educational cooperatives. And they are groups of schools that work together to do bidding processes. And so instead of the school having to go out and bid for all of these, bid for their breads, bid for their fruits and vegetables, all of these different bidding processes, they do it all together. And so there's like a group of, maybe it depends on the educational cooperative, but like probably 25 to 30 school districts that are together. and they will do the bidding process for all of those schools, and all of those schools can use those bids. And this might be applicable to you if you are growing a large amount of produce in particular, because I do know of farms that have won bids with educational cooperatives for a special type of bid. They had like a farm to school bid. And so in that case, the schools could order from that farmer that had that bid with that educational cooperative and didn't have to worry about any of the procurement rules, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But that is for generally large farms that are producing a lot. And I only know of one farm that has done that in Kentucky. But just to kind of review, I've talked a little bit about this, but I want to mention again, there are a couple things that you will need to sell to schools. So, your minimal food safety training. So either the PSA grower training or produce best practices. These are, obviously for people that are growing produce. It is likely required and highly advised that you have product liability insurance, because that's a lot of product going to a lot of different kids. And so you need to protect yourself. And then really for paperwork wise, it's pretty basic generally to sell to schools. You're just filling out a W-9, you return it to the school, and that kind of sets you up as a vendor. And just a quick note to add that product liability insurance, you can apply for CAPE funds to pay for a one-time cost share of liability insurance, and that's for GAAP audited farms. So even so, I have heard that product liability insurance is not super expensive, and we all want to protect our investments, right? So it's probably a good thing to have, even if you're not selling to schools, even if you're just selling direct to consumer. And then some of the other kind of key things to think about are that you are going to have to likely deliver the product to the schools. It might be that you're delivering it to one central location, or you might be delivering it to each school. And so it's important to think about, is this worth my time? Am I getting what I need out of the price that I'm charging in order to dedicate all this time to going around and delivering the product? And then this is what I was referencing in regards to payment. So you will have to bring an invoice when a school purchases something from you. And that goes to the school board for approval. And the reason why I have that in quotations is because they're never going to not approve a check to a local farmer, right? Like this is just an extra set of steps to prevent somebody from going and stealing a lot of money from a school. I've never heard of a farm not getting paid by a school. Like I said, they're very reliable buyers, but that's just something for you to know. It might take up to a month for you to get your check, but you're going to get your check, which is great. And if you're a part of the Kentucky Proud program, schools can get up to 15% reimbursement for purchasing your food, but you have to be a Kentucky Proud member. But that's just an extra thing to kind of push you over the edge with schools. Like, your product might be a little bit more expensive than what they're wanting to pay, but if they're going to get 15% back, they're going to be more likely to pay the price that you're asking for, or, it might be up to negotiation. And we have to think about timing also. And luckily for us, farmers, maybe your downtime, especially if you're a produce grower, is going to be the winter. And that's often the best time to approach your local food service director, because that is when they are starting to think about their planning for the summer and the fall, and starting to get their menus together. So I think I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but for schools, all of their recipes have to be approved in order to serve them. So that's why, they're serving generally meals, once a month or once a week or whatever. They have their kind of rotating menu. And that's part of the reason why, is because they have a lot of steps that they have to take in order to serve that into a school. So they're starting to think about that really right now, into maybe not right now because of the holidays, but the winter, into like January, February, March. And if they're going to go through the formal bidding process, which not many do, but some do, they're going to start doing that in March. And so that's when you're going to be seeing formal solicitations in the newspaper or whatever if they're looking for bids of a certain product. But like I said, and I'm going to talk about this, micro purchasing is really what most farmers in Kentucky and across the state are doing. And I should have included this earlier because kind of as a precursor to all of this, it does not require any sort of bidding process in order to do micro purchasing. But to give you guys some 101, so I did not know what procurement meant in the school sense prior to working in this job. So procurement is, it's the purchasing of goods and services, and food service directors, that is the language that they use. They're going to be talking about procurement. And they have standards that they have to abide by. So they have to, buy American as much as possible. Ideally, we'd like that to be all Kentucky, right? And then there are standards around, there being free and open competition. And then this one's probably pretty key to you all. It's really important that you communicate well with food service directors, especially if you're going to go through a bidding process, because if you don't follow the directions right, or you don't fill out the paperwork correctly, you basically get knocked out because you're not responsive and responsible, which is the language that they use for bids. And so it's really important to read the instructions, read the bid, and respond appropriately, respond the way that they're asking you to do that. And there are some food safety standards that schools have to follow. Okay, here's where we're getting into the procurement methods that I was referencing earlier. So on the right side, you see kind of formal procurement, which is what you might think of as being really daunting and like way too much work, right? Because schools have to get bids for the products that they're purchasing, and it's a long process. It requires public advertising. There might be a lot of competition. And that, when I was talking about the educational cooperatives earlier, that is really what those cooperatives are doing. They are doing the formal procurement pieces for the schools. They're going out and soliciting the bids, and generally those bids are, coming from large distributors, and they're doing that process for the schools. Where the schools really tie in to buying stuff, and that's not to say that schools don't do formal procurement, but where I have seen the most success has been under micro purchasing. And that's because it's actually a pretty big number, right? So as long as the purchase is less than $10,000, most schools, not every school, because some school districts do not allow micro purchasing, most schools can purchase from a local farmer or a local seller without having really any sort of bid process. All they're going to do is put together a purchase order for what they're ordering from you. And that's really just for their internal communications. You're going to bring them an invoice. They're going to submit it to the board. You're going to get a check the next month, right? That's really what we see the most farms do. And that's the easiest route. And that's because, most farms are not selling over $10,000 at once, right? So, and that's not to say that you can't sell to that school more than one time. It just has to be that a purchase is at or below $10,000. The key thing there for the food service directors is that they have to equitably distribute amongst the eligible distributors or eligible farmers, right? So they can't just buy from one farmer constantly at under $10,000. That's not to say that they can't buy from you multiple times. It just is that, they need to be looking at the other farmers or other sellers that are also selling things to them and making sure that they are distributing that equitably. Now, if you're going to be selling to a school every week or, throughout the whole year, they might do what is called a small purchase procurement method. And that is really not much more scary than the micro purchase. They do have to get 3 price quotes. So and they don't actually even have to receive it. They just have to seek free price quotes. So if they're wanting to purchase cherry tomatoes from you all fall until you don't have them anymore, every week or something like that, they're probably going to do this method of procurement, and they will have to reach out to like 2 other farmers to ask them, would you sell me cherry tomatoes every week at this quantity, and how much would it be? And likely that farmer might not be capable of doing that much, or they might not be willing, they might not want to even sell that much, they might not even respond. It doesn't matter as long as the food service director has reached out to 3 different sources for that product. And so if you're going to develop that longer term, consistent relationship with the school, they're probably going to do that. Probably not going to look much different to you, but just be aware that the food service director is doing that kind of behind the scenes. And that raises the threshold for purchases also. And so they can purchase up to $20,000 at one time. And in all of these, I just want to say that, and actually this is not up to date because the federal threshold went up in the past year or so. The federal threshold for all of these procurement methods is actually higher than the state threshold. And so despite that, that's not really helping us. Having those higher federal thresholds does not help us because we have to follow the most restrictive threshold. And so that becomes what the state threshold is, because the state threshold is significantly less than the federal threshold. Not to say it couldn't be changed in the future. It would be great if it was. And in some cases, but very few cases, like I mentioned before, some school districts will just not allow micro-purchasing at all. And if that is the case, probably because something bad happened in the past, and so they had to take that away. Or they might have a lower threshold. So it might be like, they can do micro-purchases up to $5,000 or something along those lines. So that's something that you really need to discuss with your local food service director if you're wanting to sell to schools. All right. And so the other piece of, and this doesn't always come up when you're selling to schools, but it's a great way for you all to kind of see what the school markets are seeking. So oftentimes when a food service director wants to buy something from you, they're going to lay out some product specifications. And this is kind of what it looks like. So the specification sheet here on the left, it just lays out, what the product is, size they're wanting, what grade, how they want it packed, when they want it delivered, all of those kind of things. And there's lots of examples on the KDA website that you can look at, and that'll give you a good idea of what schools are expecting. Like I said, I don't always see schools do this, but especially if you're developing a long-term kind of like weekly basis of purchases, you'll likely see this. And like I said, it's really just to communicate properly to you what they're expecting of you, so that you don't show up with a lower grade product than they want and they get all upset and send you home. It's actually a good thing, really, to have something like this, to have it very clear to both parties what the product is that you're going to be delivering. And so working with school nutrition directors or food service directors, it can seem maybe a little bit daunting because, like I said, it's a whole nother language that they're speaking practically. But it's important to think about and understand what is motivating them and why they do the things why they make the choices that they might make, right? Because we all have things that the outside world doesn't understand because they're not going through it every day, but a food service director talking to another food service director understands it. And so it's important for you to, and we covered a lot of that, but it's important for you to talk to the food service director about those things. So what do they want? What do they need? If they have, certain practices of where they want to source food. So some schools, they really push local, and so they purchase a lot of local food. Other schools, maybe they're not as motivated by that. And it really comes down to, unfortunately, it comes down to one person, which is the food service director. And so if they're not into it, or if, their budget's really tight and they are really motivated only by financials, then that's something important for you to understand and talk to them about. Talking about solicitations and procurement, whether you can do micro purchasing or whether they can do micro purchasing or whether not, if they have to do, more of the formal bid process. Obviously, it's very important to talk about how you're going to get paid. Also to think about if you are to set up a long-term relationship with this school, what happens if you're not able to fulfill an order? And likely they can just order from their distributor. Because with those really big distributors like Gordon Food Service that the schools have a bid set up with, they can order one day and it can potentially be delivered the next day. So I think sometimes that scares farmers away from selling to schools because they think that, the school is going to be mad if they're unable to deliver or if there's a big freeze and their product isn't, if they can't deliver it to the school. And then it really, in most of the food service directors I've talked to, it's really not a big deal to them because they can go and order that product or something very similar very easily through their distributor. And that is also not to say that every school thinks the same way. So that's why it's really important to have communication with your food service director. And then I also think that an important thing to look at prior to you going and meeting your food service director is what menu they're serving. And you can find all of this has to be posted on their website. It is actually under regulation or under law that they have to post this. And so you can find it pretty easily if you look on your local school's website. And I think it's important to look at the menus because you can easily see where your product might fit in, right? And the easiest way to start all of farm to school things is to start with something that they are already serving and just substitute it with the local product. So looking at this Hardin County High School menu, on Monday, popcorn chicken, right, you're probably not going to be able to substitute that super easily. But you go down the list, right? They have to have a vegetable tossed salad, local greens you can likely supply. Maybe not grapes, but you could offer a different fruit. Looking at Tuesday, spaghetti and meatballs. Some schools do cook meat. Actually, a lot of them do. So maybe it's that, instead of using their broadline distributors meatballs, you offer your ground beef and they make meatballs out of it. Or taco meat. I mean, that's another thing that's pretty easy to substitute local. So looking at your local school's menu is just a way for you to come into the conversation with the food service director more prepared, right? It gives you an idea of what they're serving, what you can provide that can just substitute. And when you start to make that connection with the food service director and, you're showing them like, hey, look, this isn't too hard to supply local, then maybe they start to branch out and do things that are off of their typical menu. And so when you're going to approach a food service director, it is important to be patient. So like any buyer, you can't just go into their office out of nowhere without a meeting set up. You'll probably freak them out a little bit and they have a lot on their plate. So they're probably going to be juggling lots of different meetings and such. So certainly make sure that you schedule a meeting with them and don't just show up unannounced. Another thing that I think is really important is to avoid judgment and don't shame school food. So, there's a lot of reasons why school food is where it's at right now. And it's unlikely that, it's entirely to be blamed on that local cafeteria worker. There's a lot of reasons why heat and serve became so popular. And without going into the history of it all, it's important to not go in there and immediately attack them about how bad their food is, right? You never want to do that when you're approaching a buyer. So just be prepared for the conversation, show that you have great expertise for food and passion for serving locally grown food. And yeah, just avoid judgment. I think school food gets a bad rep, and I'm not saying that that's not justified. There's a lot of reasons why school food is not great, but you don't want to turn somebody off immediately by talking about how bad the food is. Communication is key. And remember that trusted relationships take time. So, it might not be that you go in the first day and suddenly have a contract to deliver tomatoes to them every week. Dabble a little bit, show them that you're trustworthy, and then maybe they'll be willing to develop a more long-term sustainable relationship. And then direct from a food service director in Kentucky, a couple pieces of advice. She said that it's really great if you can schedule a meeting with them and bring samples. And we've seen a lot of success with giving people free food, right? People always like to eat, and if you can show them an example of what your product could taste like, they might be more likely to serve it in their school. And then also be willing to kind of distinguish yourself more than just outside of what you're delivering to the school. So maybe you're providing some extra benefits that, a local Gordon, or not a local, a national distributor could not necessarily provide. And there's a lot of different ways to add value to your products. One being that you could pre-cook them or freeze them or process them. And there are grants that are out there that you could apply to assist with that. One example in Kentucky that we've seen is frozen blueberries. The Kentucky Blueberry Growers Association does this. And that's a really great way for schools to purchase and serve locally grown food even in the off season. But that's a lot of infrastructure, right? So how can you add value without processing? Your food is probably going to taste better than the food that has been in a truck for 10 days, right? So it's likely that the food that they're getting from their big distributor is from California or Mexico, a lot of different places. And you got to think about all of that time that it takes to get there. We all know that fruits and vegetables from Gordon Food Service do not taste the same as fruits and vegetables from your farmer's market. Local meat does not taste the same as, the meat that you're going to get oftentimes from a distributor. And so you have that kind of advantage with selling to schools, is that when the school food service director sees and tastes how much better your food might taste, and the kids see that too, right? That's a way to add value without processing, because they might be more likely to purchase that from you. Maybe you visit the school, or the school kids come out and visit your farm. Caveat to that, I would say, is that if you are going to have a school visit out to your farm, certainly look for ways to charge them for that or apply for a grant. You have to have, some money coming in, because it is, you all are running a business, and it's important for you to be financially stable. And so I wouldn't just go out there throwing out all these free things unless you really are capable of doing that, or you want to do that. But just know that schools are entirely capable of paying to do a field trip. Maybe you have a really great recipe that you can share with them. Creating that community buy-in. So if you can get the parents or the school board to get on board with serving locally grown food, that's a great way to increase the likelihood that the food service director is going to do that. And then thinking about, putting it out on social media. We all know how important social media is these days to your business. And people love kids eating locally grown food. We have realized this with our Farm to School Network Facebook page. When we post pictures or we share photos or stories or whatever about kids eating locally grown food, people love it, because it's something everybody can get behind. It's very wholesome, right? Nobody's going to say, oh, that's horrible that the kids are eating locally grown food. Something everybody can get behind. And so schools want, just like everybody else, they want to look good to their community. And so, serving locally grown food, posting that on your Facebook page, encouraging them to post it on their Facebook page, that's a really great way to create that community buy-in, promote your farm also, and, show the schools that there is extra value to purchasing locally. All right, that was a lot of information. So, and I'm happy to share my PowerPoint with you all. But I also put a ton of links in the chat of other resources. But at the end of the day, you know, this is all great and dandy, and maybe you're totally on board to sell to schools, or maybe you're not, but there are things that we need to reflect on, right? So think about what products you are already producing that would be of interest to the schools. Do those things fit with the school that you want to sell to? Do you have the capacity to expand, right? If you're already selling all that you can grow at your farmer's market and you don't have any way of, like, you know, increasing the size of your farm or getting extra labor, you know, you probably don't necessarily need to go into the farm to school market unless you really want to. You know, think about your level of processing. It might be that you're just giving whole unprocessed product, or some farms in Kentucky have even done minimally processed foods. You know, think about the market channels that you're already selling through. If you're already selling to distributors, you might not even know it, and your food might already be in local schools. Or maybe if you are selling to distributors and you realize that, well, maybe I can get a better price from the schools, maybe you reevaluate what market channels you sell to. You know, I don't know. It's all dependent on what is best for your farm. And then also, you know, this should be something that we're all thinking about regardless of our market channel, is, are we following the proper food safety protocols? All right, that was a lot of information, but now I want to get into some fun things. So ways for you to be involved with farm to school in your state right now. And one of those is if you are in southeastern Kentucky in an area that was impacted by flooding, we do have some taste testing grants for schools, or it's not just for schools, it's to serve locally grown produce in Kentucky schools. And farmers can apply, and we actually have awarded some farms these grants. And you can apply your locally grown produce into the schools, or maybe you go and buy it from another farmer. It doesn't really matter as long as it's grown in Kentucky and Kentucky kids are eating it. And we are, like I said, we still have some funding for that. That funding came from the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, and we'll continue to accept and review applications until all the funds have been allotted. So if you're in that area, and one of the links I put in the chat has all of the information about this grant program, and what areas are eligible and all that. So if you're interested in dabbling in the school market, this is a great way to start, because you can say to a local school, I already have $1,000 and I can give this produce to you for the kids to taste test. And that's a great way, because you're not asking basically anything of them other than for them to maybe serve it to the kids. And then today we kind of went over a very brief overview of the Bringing the Farm to School training, but we will be doing a more in-depth version at the Kentucky Fruit and Vegetable Conference, which is already next month. Crazy. Time is flying. And that will be on Monday, January 2nd from 4 to 6 p.m. in Bowling Green as part of the Fruit and Veg Conference at the Sloan Convention Center. Everyone is invited to attend the Bringing the Farm to School training. It is a free pre-conference event, and we will be serving a local dinner afterwards. Obviously, we ask that you register so we know how many people are coming. But in addition to that, we do have a limited number of stipends to give to farmers that attend the training. So you'll get free conference registration for the rest of the conference. So the conference is Tuesday and Wednesday. So the pre-conference events are on Monday. And at the end of our training, we'll hand you a $50 check. So if you're interested in that, the link is also in the chat, I believe. And then if you're looking for something just like not so much effort, or you just want to promote your farm, or maybe all of the above, we do have some promotional yard signs that we've been giving out for the past few months. And you can, as you can see in the right-hand corner, it says "This farm feeds Kentucky kids." There's a corresponding school one that says that this school supports Kentucky farmers. And we really made a big push to have those out for Farm to School Month, which is October. But you can have it out all year round. You can display it at your farm. You can display it at your farmer's market booth, your farm stand, whatever. It's a great way to promote your farm. And also, like I said, you know, nobody is going to be against serving locally grown food to Kentucky kids. to local kids, right? So it's a great, it's a good marketing tool too. Like it shows, you know, your customers that you care about their kids. And lastly, I just want to say that Farm to School is growing, and KDA received a cooperative agreement grant earlier this year. It was just a couple months ago, for over $3 million, and all of that money has to be spent on locally produced food. Now, their definition of local is maybe a little bit different than what ours is. It's within 400 miles of where it's going to be delivered to. And they are awarding that money to schools to purchase locally grown food. And that money will be coming to the schools. Well, rather, it's a reimbursement program, but the schools will be able to start spending that food money early next year. And so this is a great time to talk to your local food service director, because they're about to have access to a lot of extra funds, more than just what they're getting from the reimbursements. They're going to have, you know, a couple of $1,000s at least. That $3 million is going to be distributed to the schools that opt in. And so that's, you know, that's just another, and it has to be spent on locally grown food. So that's just another way for them to, for you to easily convince them that they should purchase your food. And with that, we've seen an increase in interest in Farm to School just in the last few months. So all of these pictures were taken by Farm to School network members or ourselves over the past few months. We've seen locally grown food served all across the state, from apples to locally sourced meatloaf to sweet potatoes at Thanksgiving dinner. We've been able to do 2 local tasting events for food service directors. This picture up here of me in the center, and then of Mariana from Garrett Farms in the bottom center. We're trying to push more of that, and I would look out for that in the future. Basically, at events that food service directors are convening, we're doing some locally sourced taste testings to just establish that relationship with the farms, for food service directors to taste that locally grown food. And for the first time ever this year, we were able to get a Farm to School Month proclamation for October. So all to say that Farm to School is growing, and this is a market that it might be a little bit more complicated than your direct to consumer market, but if you can make it work for you, it really might be worthwhile. And it's something that I would encourage everybody to explore, and do if it makes sense for your farm. And with that, there is my contact information. I will put it in the chat as well. I'm always happy to talk Farm to School. This is something that I love and have spent a lot of time researching and talking to people about. So obviously I don't know everything, but it feels like I certainly know a lot about Farm to School, and would be more than happy to help anybody in Kentucky that is interested in selling to their local schools, because I want you to be successful at it. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can actually see my